This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10. The sun is out, spring it feels is sprung. Who else was sowing seeds or putting seedlings in the ground? Yeah, you too, me. Lots to be happy about and excited about. Beetroot, actually, in case any need for clarification. And I'm having a little experiment with Brussels sprouts this year, although I'm not optimistic. Conveyor belts. What do you think of when I say conveyor belts? I was about to reference 1970s television in my head, which means you have to do that quick audit of whether or not any of the people that you're about to reference have ended up in prison or in disgrace. I'm pretty sure we're safe with the generation game, aren't we? So I say conveyor belt. What do you think of? You think of, if you're of a certain age, you think of the generation game. You think of a Teasmade. And all the other prizes that were a cuddly toy, Teasmade, all the things on the. But I'm fascinated by the notion of socio-economic conveyor belts. I'm fascinated by I'm envious of you if you are confident stepping out of your lane. So even though I've ended up doing quite a strange job, I had ambitions as a very young person to follow my father into the media. So that conveyor belt would go from GCSEs to A-levels, from A-levels to university, from university to career. And by some miracle, I'm still here, still wanging on every morning in your lug holes. But do you see what I mean? It's a conveyor belt. I bumped into a very old friend a few months ago. I literally bumped into him walking through Hyde Park. And he's the opposite. We went to the same school. We've got a similar background. He's from a military family, so a little bit more footloose than me, and a little bit more used to hopping around the place. We had similar enthusiasms at school. He was a bit sportier than I was, but apart from that, we were into the same sort of thing. We debated together. We were a top team, debating, acting, all the stuff I've told you in the past that I loved. And he had just lived a completely different life from me. He'd done so many different things. He'd ended up settling in India for a while and just got a new career up and running, and he was getting a little bit bored of it. So he was thinking of coming back here and talking to me about possible opportunities. Fearless. I mean, privileged, don't get me wrong. A background like ours, an education like ours, you've not only got the confidence to believe that you can do almost anything, you've also got the contacts. The chutzpah to walk into a room and come out of it with a new job in your back pocket that you'd never really thought of applying for in the first place. But there was no conveyor belt there. There was no sense of predestination, almost. I'm very lucky because I love this. And if I had to design my dream job, it would look a lot like this. But that's not really the point. It was a conveyor belt. So that would be the professional side of it, wouldn't it? That would be O-levels or GCSEs. And I can keep all the people happy all of the time on this one because I actually did both. I did half a dozen O-levels, half a dozen GCSEs. Such was the timing, the chronology of my school career, followed by A-levels, followed by a gap year, if you were so minded, followed by university, followed by degree, followed by hopefully career. It was a bit of a slow start for some of us. Our student jobs could have turned into our proper jobs, or you could have spent a little bit longer trying to get your foot in the door of your dream career, or even just a nice career than you intended. But it was there, and you moved along, don't you, to wherever you are now. So that's the socio-economic or the career, the status-linked side of it. I would have thought that the most common element of the conveyor belt of life was children, babies. That impulse or that appetite, that desire that sort of kicks in. If you're really going to be straight-laced about it, it's when you've met someone with whom you want to settle down. I'm not sitting in judgment of anybody whose family springs from different origins. I'm just talking about what the most common conveyor belt looks like. You meet somebody with whom you want to settle down, and not long after settling down, you begin to feel an urge to nest. You begin to feel an urge to breed, to procreate, to have a family. I don't know how much of it is conveyor belt and how much of it is organic, like a form of, I don't know, emotional evolution. We must have that impulse. as a consequence of evolution. It must be a drive to procreate. I mean, it's kind of what most understandings or most principles of evolution hinge on, isn't it? That desire to propagate the species, survival of the fittest, all of that. It's that desire to replicate your genes in its simplest form. It never feels like that. That feels scientific and laboratory based. You just have some sort of overwhelming urge, which you might call love, to become, in my case, a father, in your case, a father or a mother. But what if it's not? Well, what if it's not a natural consequence of simply being alive? What if there are other variables in play? I mean, I don't quite get it, because people had an urge to procreate, or at least they had an urge to do the thing that leads to procreation, even when the life or the world into which you would be bringing a child was, or the life they were set to lead, was nasty, brutish and short. To paraphrase, I think it was Hobbes. I always misremember that one. And when you think about infant mortality rates, until relatively recently, the reason why in the developing world the birth rate is still so high, why it is one of the key aims of aid, of Quangos and NGOs and aid charities in the West, to reduce the birth rate in the developing world, because as infant mortality improves, so people don't need to have lots of children in order to maximize the chance of some of them surviving. So that impulse is there for all of us, isn't it? At least I always thought it was. It was Mother's Day yesterday. Is there anybody listening who has just spent the last 24 hours wondering why their partner was in such a funny mood? And you've now finally realised, oh my God, I forgot. Has anyone listening just done that? God, oh my days, that's why she hasn't spoken to me since breakfast. Yes, it's Mother's Day. I'll give you some advice. I probably should have given it to you on Friday. If you have young children and you are a little bit confused by Mother's Day, because all you've ever done on Mother's Day is send a card or some flowers to your own mother. If the mother of your children is quite rightly expectant of some mark of the moment, never respond by saying, but you're not my mum. Why would I get you anything on Mother's Day? You're not my mum. Why would I get you? If the mother of your children is the person you should honour on Mother's Day, as well as your own mother, I think that's a mistake you could be allowed perhaps to make once. Yeah, just once. I don't think there's any excuse for making it twice. But if anybody listening to this has genuinely just gone, oh no, that's why the weekend was so fraught, that's why everything, I could not get my hat thing, I just couldn't work out why the mood was so icy in the house. I felt like we were in, and there it is. It's finally landed. Now you know. But it was Mother's Day yesterday, and fewer women. It's an odd thing to mark, but there's a good piece in the Times today, a good column by Jenny Russell. Fewer and fewer women are becoming mothers worldwide. Britain in particular is in the middle of what she describes as fertility collapse. In 2020, half of Britain's 30-year-old women were childless. Wait for it. For the first time since records began. So 50% of women aged 30 were childless for the first time ever. If you were to just pan back to 1941, which would be the current 30-year-old's grandmother's generation, guess what percentage of 30-year-old women in 1941 were childless? Go on, have a guess. Yeah. Lower. 18%. So you've gone from 18% to 50% in the course of that grandmother's lifetime. If you want to maintain your population at a steady level, women on average need to have 2.1 children. Now, don't be funny. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you just sort of have 2 children and a hand. It's what happens when you divide the overall total, because it accounts for infant mortality, it accounts for tragedy, it accounts for heartbreak and loss. What would you point to first? We dipped below 2.1 children 6 years after the Abortion Act came in 1973. Had the Abortion Act been enacted in Ireland in 1972, I don't know that I would be here today. I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be. The babies that are now, or that were once given up for adoption, are not are no longer being born. They're no longer babies. They don't become babies. The contraceptive pill has become widely available, and this has transformed a woman's ability to control family size. And, I already knitted 3 stories together today. I've just remembered that there's a 4th that plays very, very neatly into this story, into this morning's conversation as well. The big question is, will I be able to find the story? What's the time now? 10:13. By the time we head towards the first junction of our time together, I think I will, but I can't currently. There's a story about making it much, much easier to get the morning after pill in chemists. I think at the moment there are a couple of hoops you have to jump through, don't you? You have to have some sort of consultation. It's a very long time since I attended any sort of clinics in that space, but it wasn't simply a case of turning up at the chemist's, handing over your payment and then being given a morning after pill. It can be a physically quite traumatic experience, but making the morning after pill much easier to get hold of. So what else do you need to knit into this story? This is an article from the Daily Telegraph. Britain must rely on immigration to compensate for falling birth rate. This comes as the official fertility rate is shown to be in England and Wales at 1.44 births for women. So it's fallen by a quarter in 15 years, roughly speaking, since the global financial crisis. You remember the global financial crisis that the Tories were still trying to pin on Gordon Brown at the last general election. So you're now going to be able to get a morning after pill without charge at a pharmacy in England. I think that's progress. Of course it is, because forcing women to have children that they don't want to have is barbaric, and almost certainly soon to become policy in Donald Trump's Republican Party. Well, it kind of already has, actually, hasn't it? So there's a lot going on here. How easy do you think it will be to boil it down, to distill it down to brass tacks? I think it should be quite easy. I say childless, and I could say child-free. Let me make that clear from the start. I now say child-free until the next time when I'll say childless, and then I'll say child-free again. There's two things going on here, isn't there, in those 2 words, childless and child-free. There are conversations about wanting children in an abstract sense, but not feeling able to have them in a concrete one. This is why I began somewhat unexpectedly by talking to you about conveyor belts and cuddly toys. You kind of know that is the next stop on your conveyor belt, but you're not sure you're ever going to get there because of that other story that I mentioned to you today about Generation Z being much more worried about work and what you might call important things, as opposed to their parents and grandparents who are obsessed about culture wars and immigration and all the other things that the right-wing media tell them every morning to be obsessed about. I mean, quite how you get a professor of gerontology at Oxford University explaining publicly why we need higher immigration to compensate for a falling birth rate in a country where immigration remains, it sometimes seems, the only conversational topic for newspapers and programs like this is a mystery to me, because if you care about what matters, you'd be caring about the birth rate. Children born to British mothers, the number has fallen by a quarter in 15 years. So there are 2 conversations. There's the first about wanting children in an abstract sense, but not feeling that you can in a concrete sense. Who's going to look after them? How are we going to pay for them? What will be the sacrifices that we make? Who will actually do the childcare? I mean, you see that clearly. And then you've got possibly slightly more existential questions about the climate and the world that you're bringing children into, and the sense abroad at the moment that the old nasty hatreds are enjoying a bit of a resurgence, a bit of a resurrection. Do you want to bring children into a world where they're going to be attacked for their ethnicity, or attacked for their gender, or attacked for their beliefs almost? A world that seems to thrive, it sometimes seems, on negativity and nastiness. But the climate's probably a bigger factor in that. The threat of war, all sorts of things could be playing. And I don't know whether or not I would have had that if I was your age, because I don't know how glued I am to my conveyor belt. More glued than my mate, although he has children as well, and a wife. But that nimbleness, that freedom to hop off the conveyor belt and do something different instead. I don't have it in career, and I don't have it in personal life either. I don't have a professional or a personal ability to unglue myself from the conveyor belt. But if I was 25 now, if I was 28 now, if I was 30 now, and I wasn't in the sort of financial health that I was 23 years ago, how big a factor would it be? So, why are you child-free? Robin Maidenhead suggests that the decline in religious belief may have played a part in it. I don't know about that, to be honest, Rob. I mean, if that is your personal reason for not being a parent, you'd have to explain it a little more, I think. I mean, the Catholic teachings on contraception and abortion may have played a part, of course, in women almost not having agency or autonomy when it came to having children, not having, because of their religious beliefs, any freedom whatsoever to avoid pregnancy or terminate pregnancy. So that might be a part. Mike says it's another mouth to feed, James. We can barely afford the dogs. Let's do it that way around. So why 03456060973 conscious decisions to your own surprise? If you went back to your 12-year-old self and you pointed at the conveyor belt and you said, oh, by the way, you'll be hopping off that one, and your 12-year-old self would have gone, really? I don't think so. Of course I'm going to be a mum one day. Of course I want to have children. But you have actually decided not to, possibly for now, maybe forever, but you've decided not to. It's not just the way the cookie crumbles, you know. You have to have decided. So why did you decide? 03456060973. And what's it like? What's it like? How hard is it? I can't quite get that. I mean, we had such difficulty getting pregnant in the first place, down to my contributions. That aching pain, that horror, that staring into the abyss of what for us would have been childlessness is quite hard to get past. So why did you decide? 03456060973. And how has it been? What's it like? How do people grow? I mean, how do your parents? I mean, all of it. I want all of it. All of it. What's it like? It's 10:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10, and there'll be so many different answers to this question. Some will be quite light-hearted. Stephen said, I never wanted children. I was too busy being a failed musician and actor. Never really had the urge. Perhaps I'm a rarity. You see, that's part of my reasoning today. Maybe you're not. Maybe if society hadn't created the pressures to have children, and that's where Robin Maidenhead's point about religion, I think, is true, because religion told you that you had to, and that if you could, you would. And if you were of a certain religion, then every sperm was sacred, to paraphrase Monty Python. But society doesn't do that anymore, does it? I don't know. I'm 53. If I was 33, would I feel less stuck to the conveyor belt? Because what is a conveyor belt if not societal pressure? What is a conveyor belt if not a kind of consensus in society that the next stage of life that you reach will be the one which, or the one that involves children. So why? And as I fully appreciate when I say the words, everybody now hears my old pal's voice, my 12-year-old friend's voice in their heads. What was it, or indeed what is it like? Linda's in Hampton Court. Linda, what would you like to say?
Got married in 1969, and we had to decide, I guess, whether to have children in the 1970s. And what came first was buying somewhere to live and then paying off then what was a huge mortgage to us at 16% or whatever it was.
Yes.
And we both enjoyed our jobs, me especially, and we had no close family nearby who could have lent a hand with children. So that was the end of that.
Quite rare in that era, wasn't it?
We see so many grandparents now walking along with prams. I wouldn't mind a grandchild, but we never got to the middle stage.
Did you talk about it?
Yes, we did.
And so it was a conscious decision?
Yes, it
partly,
was.
I sense, because you enjoyed your career so much, you didn't really want to give it up.
That's right. And we enjoyed, frankly, both of us earning money and going to the theatre when we wanted and going on lovely holidays. and none of which we could have done.
Which is going to be a very different calculation from the ones that young people are facing today. I mean, Mark tells me we can barely afford to live as it is, let alone adding every single aspect of having children. And a kicker, I'd love to be a dad to a couple of kids, but we simply can't afford it. This cost of living crisis that is not cutting through in ways that people are personally experiencing is going to be more true in this field than almost any other. Yours was... Yeah. I don't want to say selfish, because that's completely the wrong word to use, but it was a self-regarding decision. It was, this is my life and I like it.
The life we had.
Yes.
And now when we're pensioners, obviously now, and when other pensioner friends are having their children look after them, we think, oh, we should have. Because
well, you'd quite like to have grandchildren, but you'd still want to cut out the middleman and woman.
That's right.
Yeah, well, it doesn't work like that. Maybe I don't know. Maybe there'd be some sort of scheme whereby people like you can borrow children from people like parents whose own parents are no longer with us or who don't live nearby. But you speak to a sense of regret, and that I don't know that would be present today. These numbers are stunning. The 30-year-old woman in Britain in 2020 being 50-50 childless, as opposed to her grandmother's generation when the figure was 18%. 18% of 30-year-old women childless in that era. And of course, when you bring the immigration conversation into the picture, everything changes. We still live in a country, or we now live in a country, where the conversation about immigration has been completely toxified. Even Labour prime ministers speak about it as if it were a net negative, as if there is almost no such thing as good immigration. All the conversation is about people who are here irregularly or illegally, as you have to say these days. And yet, this simple contribution from the Professor of Gerontology at Oxford University, speaking to the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee, is that the UK and other ageing nations must turn to foreign-born mothers to boost population growth. So why did you make this decision? Why did you decide that it wasn't for you? I'll tell you what, on a personal level, how did you unglue yourself from the conveyor belt? So imagine me in it wouldn't be 19, would it? It would be in about the year 2001 or 2002. And I'm glued to life's conveyor belt. I am absolutely unquestioning of the fact, and so is my wife, that we want to have children next. We got married in 25 years this year. We got married in 2000. Very good move, that. Very easy to remember. And after a couple of years, we just knew that the next stage would be to have children. How do you unglue yourself from that position? I mean, do you do it consciously? Do you know that it's happening? You presume a year or two. People even start saying it, I think sometimes quite insensitively. Are we going to be hearing the pitter-patter of tiny feet soon? It's an expectation, not only that society places upon you, but that you place upon yourselves. And these figures suggest that either it is no longer an expectation, that ungluing your feet from that conveyor belt is a heck of a lot easier than it felt to me 22 years ago, or that there are emotional journeys being undertaken by huge numbers of men and women that do not get the coverage or spark the conversations that they should be doing because people aren't happy about the decisions that they've made. England and Wales, 1.44 births per woman, which means that sustaining our society as it is going to need much higher levels of not just immigration, but also fertility from foreign-born mothers that feel welcome and invited here. I don't know where the heck we're going to find them in the current climate or indeed with the current political rhetoric. So talk me through what you've done and why, and what it feels like, how hard it is to unglue yourself from that conveyor belt. But also, I mean, do you have to be a professor of gerontology at Oxford University to see the danger on the road ahead? Or can you see the dangers that our society faces as a consequence of this plummeting birth rate? I'm not, I don't think, minded today to do the psychology of why it would be so much easier for me to do a phone-in about isn't it awful that there's so many immigrants, as opposed to a much more important and a much more statistically sound phone-in about, isn't it awful that the birth rate is plummeting? Because it is awful, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. I'm getting a few people like Linda ringing in. It's lovely to speak to you, Linda, and others. But I do want people in this cohort, people who are right in the age range of it. So people who could still be doing it, could still be having children, or people who have only very relatively recently decided that they don't want to. I want to know about social change, not necessarily people like Linda who were outliers at the time, but people who define what I'm going to continue to describe, I think, as seeking to unglue yourself from that conveyor belt. That's what I want to hear about, ungluing yourself from the conveyor belt of expectations, especially when your own parents probably want you to stay glued to the conveyor belt. You tell your mum that she's never going to be a grandma. It's a tough conversation, right? It's a difficult message to receive. But as ever on this programme, every question I ask is underpinned by the eternal inquiry. What was it like? Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I wonder how middle class this conversation is. I wonder how many ears it's reaching as a luxurious contemplation that you can only really do when you're insulated from some of the more urgent demands upon your time. Scott puts it well. Comfortably off people can worry about these theories in the future, but the poor have the practicalities and today to worry about. Unless governments make sacrificing careers financially worthwhile, why would women want children young? And I know you're right, and you speak to one of my Achilles' heels when it comes to worrying that sometimes the conversations or the questions that I ask you are born of my own privilege. But as Jesus said, the poor have always been with us. And the idea that you're worse off now if you're at the bottom end of the socio-economic ladder than you were 50 years ago is just patently wrong. You were more likely to bring a child into relative poverty. And people are not willing or ready to do that now. That is a question worth asking. Why? What's changed? What's changed? Charlie's in Putney. Charlie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, there's two kind of separate things, but the first thing is what you said about the conveyor belt,
yes.
Because I speak about this a lot, and it's not that I feel like I was knocked off of it, and that I've realised it. So that's caused me to become unglued from it. So, I'm 36, so a millennial, so I was raised under the understanding that you did things in a certain order, which I think is what you're talking about.
It wasn't an unpleasant way to grow up or an unpleasant expectation, but it was also relatively unquestioned. GCSEs, A levels, college probably, work, career, family, kids.
Yeah, but gradually over the years that I've had to realign my perception of that because, me and my wife, we're renting, we earn around 130 odd K as a household income, and we're still saving for a deposit. And don't get me wrong, we're aware that we do very well and that there are a lot of people worse off than us. But that leads me to realise we're not doing anything wrong. It's not us. Yeah. We're not the problem here. And again, if we're struggling, how hard is it for other people who don't earn as much? So that feeds into it. I guess you could say that's kind of moot because we don't want to have children. It's just, the last caller mentioned like holidays and stuff like that, and you said you don't want to call her selfish. I'll take that label, James. I am selfish. I see my sister and my wife's sister. They've got kids, and it's hard, and it consumes every waking minute of their lives, and I don't want that. I love my nieces and nephews and have a great time with them, but it's wonderful to be able to give them back.
And your wife feels the same?
Yeah, and we made sure to discuss it long before we got married.
So slightly different then. So when you say you've been knocked off the conveyor belt, it wasn't something that you wanted or expected to happen. It was something that you decided wasn't for you.
With regards to the kids, I guess the others.
So you're talking more about the home owning, because I was poised to ask you, and this is what happens when I resist the urge to interrupt. I find out interesting things that mean that the question I was going to interrupt you to ask would have been a silly question. So you don't I was going to point out lots of people living in rented accommodation are raising families. It's not a prerequisite or a precursor.
No, I mean, we live in an apartment block, and there's lots of families that live here with small children. But there's, as you mentioned earlier, ethical and moral questions that come into it. Why would I want to bring a child into this world in the current state it's in? You know, I don't see any kind of viable future for young people at the moment, and I don't see it getting better anytime soon. So, you know, why would I want to bring new lives into that?
And that's something that wouldn't have crossed your mind if you were my age. If you were 20 years, if you'd been here 20 years ago, I don't think these considerations were as acute, or certainly that these voices were as loud. I don't like selfish as a word. You're more than welcome to call yourself selfish, of course, but Emma makes a good point. I've always considered it from the utterly opposite angle. They write, having children is the selfish urge rather than being child-free. What's more selfish than insisting that it's your DNA that is propagated and prolonged? Well, if it's a biological urge, I don't know that you can necessarily call it selfish. And of course, as an adopted person, I've always been struck by the urge to parent, transcending the urge to simply replicate your own DNA, which of course my mum and dad did as well. Rebecca is in Exeter. Rebecca, what would you? Thank you, Charlie. I like that. These different hues, so many different facets to what seems a simple question. Of course, it's anything but. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hi. I think sometimes people are not really looking at these kind of bigger structural issues. So in terms of the conveyor belt, in my own personal experience, so I'm from a religious background, and I got married last year. I'm 30. And for me, it was very much like, we don't live with your partner until you're married. And then before our marriage took place, we had to go for these kind of like pre-wedding counselling chats. And it was
you said that. I mean, I don't know that your voice, I don't know what it's like normally, but it doesn't sound like that was a completely pleasant experience for you.
I mean, I'm grateful that we did it because it prepared us for now married life. But one of the big kind of questions that come up was about having children, and it was that kind of follow-on conveyor belt. And it was seen that, you know, to be dutiful in your marriage, you go on and have children. But then when I take a step back, there's a few things that I just don't feel like politicians or people are looking at. So, number one, I think right now, especially for females my kind of age, it just doesn't make financial sense for us to have children. I mean, looking at the cost of childcare, and then also like maternity rights in the UK aren't the greatest. And then throw in the factor of housing. Like, I have friends who are 38, 39 who are living in kind of like shared like rental accommodation. So even if they wanted to have children and move out with their partners, they couldn't afford to, along with the cost of childcare. And I think you don't want to have children and raise them because you always want them to have a better life than what you're having.
That's
Whereas
crucial.
I feel like in the UK, I don't feel like if I had children now, they would have a good life. You know, we've seen a drop in living standards whereby people my age are kind of experiencing worse financial kind of freedom and that like high disposable income. It just seems ludicrous when people are struggling, and not everyone, granted, but quite a lot of people are struggling just to feed themselves. I know the person talking about having a dog, they're struggling to feed the dog. Like, it's just
this struggle is real. I mean, we live in a media discourse where the only time some people seem to think that people's financial struggles are real is when they're moaning about not being able to afford the VAT on their children's school fees. We're talking about an entirely different universe of British people where the calculations don't allow it. I mean, you could probably, but that, I think the really interesting thing you said is that presumption that you'll end up better off than your parents, the presumption that your children will have even a marginally better life than you had, which was true until relatively recently, wasn't it? That's a different kind of conveyor belt. That's an upward conveyor belt, and we've talked a lot about how that's not true anymore.
Yeah, it does make me feel sad in a way, because I'll never forget once when I was at university, one of our lecturers said, well, if you don't have children, all those years of evolution end with you. And thinking back, that is quite a scary thought, and I would like to have children. As I say, I'm at the age of 30
I don't think that was an evolutionary biologist who said that to you. No, because I mean it's a fairly ignorant analysis of evolution. As long as the species continues, then evolution continues. Even your evolution doesn't end with you, because you have so many shared ancestors whose progeny and offspring will continue to procreate and move forward. So you can let yourself off that particular hook, Rebecca. But the idea that it's a utilitarian decision, really. It's just the greater good for you would be to continue as you are.
No, I'd agree. But as I say, right now, just the cost of children, the cost of living, it just, even if me and my husband were to have a child, it would probably be the, quote, one and done.
Yeah.
I could not see us having, like my grandparents, they were one of 10. It's just not realistic.
I'm glad you said that, because it's actually a mistake in the way that I framed the conversation, isn't it? Because if we're talking about the falling birth rate, then one and done is part of the quotes problem, end quotes. It's not just about being child-free or childless. It's about having fewer children than parents. So 2 parents, 1 child, birth rate falls. Population falls as well, unless you bring people in. And of course, our population continues to grow because more and more people, not only do we need the tax revenues from people working in order to essentially keep the pension system moving, we also will need people to literally look after an older and older population as it becomes older and often, but not always, weaker. Rebecca, thank you. And that word dutiful, I think we possibly need to revisit Robin Maidenhead's question about religion. I was a bit quick to dismiss it because you're right, it was seen as duty. And he's back. He's come back. He says, having a religious faith helps us have confidence in the purpose of human existence. So many young people find reasons to doubt it. From climate change to political world affairs and war, reasons are found to doubt the wisdom of bringing children into an awful world. He thinks faith can assist with that. But it can't pay the bills, famously, can it? It's coming up to 10:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. Harry speaks for a few people who've messaged me this morning but not rung in. The opposite side of the conversation is where he sits. I find that childlessness or child-freeness is a symptom of your own parents sometimes. My parents not being the greatest actually led me to committing more to the conveyor belt. I found meaning by proving that the problems were not generational. And yet some people have made the opposite point to me. If you've been unfortunate in your allocation of parent, if you didn't have a lucky experience or a particularly loving experience or a happy experience with your own parents, then possibly it impacts upon your own desire to start a family, your own desire to be a parent. I guess it can actually cut both ways. A few people, and this oddly is a thought that popped into my head. I can't see a phone in it, though, for reasons that I think are going to be quite obvious. 90% of people in the surveys and the research that I've been looking at this morning, 90% of parents, 91% of parents said they were glad they'd had children. So you know how my mind works. Immediately, I want to speak to the 9%. I mean, imagine that. Imagine thinking, I wish we'd never bothered. I wish we never had. There could be a million reasons for that, couldn't there? And it's not, I wish this person didn't exist. It's just, I wish that we had not become parents. You don't even have to dislike your own children. They might be very, very poorly. And the life that you lead together, a life of pain and struggle, albeit one that's punctuated by moments of pure love. If you had known what was ahead, you may have chosen differently. But it's such fraught territory. Even saying that there could be misconstrued as me meaning something that I don't mean to suggest. Just that idea that if you had been given a little taster of what your parenting journey was going to look like, then for whatever reason, you might have thought, actually, if that's what it is, I probably will, I'll pass. But it's only 9%, which I guess is encouraging. 10:50 is the time. Janet's in Bourne End. Janet, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Janet.
Yes, first-time caller.
Welcome.
I listen all the time.
Thank you.
To your programme. Get very passionate about it.
Good.
But yesterday, Mother's Day, my younger son, who's 33, took us out for lunch. And it was just, we were talking about this, funny enough, only because there were families on their mobile phones. It's Mother's Day, and they're all on them. And he just happened to say, oh, my goodness, I would not want to be a child today.
Right.
And he said, he's only 33. He said, but I would come home from school. He said there was no technology. You went straight out on your bikes. You played football. You went to the park. You just didn't have this technology that takes over everything. And then, of course, listening to your programs over even the last week, we've got the social day you had, about
adolescence, the TV drama, all of the pressures kids.
All of that. You've got no council houses anymore. I mean, when I was born, my mum, I'm early 60s.
Yeah.
I'm the eldest of four. My dad was a dustman. You just was given a lovely council house. There's no council houses left anymore. Everybody automatically got one, and you had lovely gardens. You had all your organic vegetables in your garden. You didn't have fast food restaurants.
You're sounding you're in slight danger of sounding like one of those Facebook posts about drinking from hose pipes and existing solely on a diet of Spangles. I mean, there has been some progress and improvement in life since then.
There has, but look at the problems we've also got. Mental health. You've never had, and people aren't getting jobs, so therefore they won't be able
the forecast is bleak. Children. The forecast is bleak, and yet it's bleak for everybody, including the people who still have the urge to have children. So, were you surprised to hear your son talk? Is he your only child?
No, my eldest son's got three. I've got three lovely grandsons.
Oh, that is known as having your cake and eating it, Janet, isn't it? So you got one son giving you the existential angst, and the other one giving you the grandchildren. But were you surprised to hear him talk like that?
I was, because it just shows you how people are thinking very much more deeply. I mean, it's always a big decision to have children.
It is,
obviously, but I think people think a lot deeper now than what they did. I don't know if that's a right thing to say.
No, I think you're right. They're more conscious. Well, possibly life is less comfortable, so you're more conscious of problems and contradictions. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is the one that the caller, a couple of calls picked up on. I think that knowing that you're not, and I know this sounds weird, I would choose my words correctly, knowing that even if you're going to bring in things like the environment, so it doesn't just have to be your own material situation, your child's childhood is going to be worse than yours.
Yes.
That's what your son was talking about.
Yes.
But it's also about property ownership. It's also about the cost of living. It's about the relationship between wages and house prices.
My younger son has got his own house, but there's no way they could afford to have children.
But they can. They can afford to have children, but they can't, if you see what I mean. If people had children when they were living in hovels.
Yes, I know, but you weren't entitled to things those days either.
You can't have it. You said a minute ago, everyone got a council house. What was that if not an entitlement?
Well, you did, but you didn't have...
You know how this show works, Janet.
I suppose it does. This is why I don't normally ring you up.
Well, no, I don't want to frighten you away. But the point is that as your family proves, you can do it, but you can also make an extremely powerful case for not doing it. But I think the biggest thing that's changed is probably a variety of that, or a variation on that theme. If I had a child now, their childhood would not be as good as mine.
That is true, because the world out there, the climate, the traffic, everything, I mean, just looking at, I know it sounds silly with children, but the traffic, the fumes, people are getting more illnesses at a younger age.
Thank God for Sir Sadiq Khan then, on that front at least, and the huge improvements that he's visited upon this part of the country and in that arena alone. But that's amazing to have two sons representing both sides of this coin, and that I think is a big part of it. And that's the first time in living memory that you are not likely to surpass your own parents materially or socioeconomically. And it doesn't just mean, the middle class dream. As Janet said, her old man was a dustman. I believe he wore a dustman's hat. And he once took her around the corner to see a football match. Like, she's never heard that before. But working for the council, living in a council house, having an expectation that was probably greater than what her grandchildren might have now. And that, I think, changes the nature of the conveyor belt, doesn't it, in a way? Because it doesn't feel like perpetual motion. It doesn't feel like perpetual progress. Thank you, Janet. From Bourne End to Islington, Catherine's there. Catherine, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hello.
Hello.
I am calling because I am a new mum, and I don't regret for a second having my baby, who I completely adore.
Yes.
But it has opened my eyes to really how serious the childcare costs are.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of mention how difficult it is. So I always wanted to have 2 children. Like you, I have tried for years and years, so we feel very lucky to have one. I still want to have 2.
Sure.
However, looking into how much it's going to cost, I earn a really decent salary, so I don't qualify for any free nursery care. To put 2 children into nursery is going to cost me £58,000 a year, which is going to leave me with about £8,000 a year for everything else.
So you're working to get through that period where you need to pay for childcare, and then at the end of it, you get your salary back, as it were.
Well, yeah, I hope so. But I guess during that period, the thing that's going to be very difficult is in my job. Sometimes I need to do calls with America.
Yeah.
Can't stay late because I can't afford the extra fees at nursery if I'm late picking her up. But also I realise I'm signing myself up to basically not get promoted for 5 years, despite working very hard for years and years and years leading up to this.
Yeah.
It's just really, really hard to make ends meet. And
that's mad, isn't it? And I'm a bit dismissive of the old VAT on school fees argument, but the idea that people who are, by their own analysis, well off, or at least earning a lot of money, and also by statistical comparison, I saw a headline the other day about the number of people earning over £100,000 a year who do not think they are well off, who are struggling, to use your phrase, to make ends meet. And someone on £25,000 a year is going to find that impossible to believe, but it doesn't mean it's not true.
That's it. I mean, that's it. I'm on £100,000. That's it, and I will have £8,000 left after childcare costs. So I'm earning that money to hand over my children to strangers all day.
Yeah. And yet, if you didn't, then the career would go into reverse. And when they start primary school and you're ready to be more committed again, then you'd have probably set yourself back in some ways permanently.
Well, exactly. I mean, it already feels like it could be permanent, because it's that 5 years is a long time to suddenly not be the hard-working person that you were.
And all those whippersnappers, snapping at your heels and stepping into the space that you have.
You're making me feel much better about this. But, the other thing I would just say is just how we've kind of designed society to operate. You're kind of encouraged to go away from your family to go and get educated, or to go get your job, whatever it is. So we are away from our family. We've got no family support. We kind of feel like we've done everything we were told to do. And now we're in a situation where, it is a real serious
struggle. There's no breathing space. You're describing an absence of breathing space, aren't you? Where you just, or like the ease with which the conveyor belt moves forward. Well, for good or for ill, we didn't have to worry about it. It would move forward. And you remind us of fertility being definitely a contributing factor to this, but by no means the only conversation. I mean, who has breathing space? And it is within breathing space that you make these decisions and have these conversations. And Catherine, sounding like someone who wouldn't have made different decisions, but who certainly felt the urge, the pull of parenthood, to the exclusion of all the other considerations that people have brought to the table. It's not going to get any better anytime soon either. And of course, with the warning from Sarah Harper, the professor of gerontology at Oxford University, it's unlikely ever to return to 2.1 children per mother. That's the replacement rate. That's to keep a population stable. She said the UK and other ageing nations must turn to foreign-born mothers to boost population growth.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, and I forgot even to tell you which hospital it was that has shut its maternity unit in response to this steep fall in birth rate. It's the Royal Free Hospital that will lose its unit because the number of women having a baby in Camden, the borough in which it is located in London, has declined by almost 30% in the last 5 years. I just have a sense that, and listen, I'm a seagull following the trawler on this. It's not like I've stumbled across the fertility rates. It's already being reported, but perhaps not with quite the concern or attention that it should be. It feels more important to me than a lot of the stuff that garners a lot more attention. And I wonder if we've done that thing again, where we've started speaking quite early about something that a few weeks, months, even years down the line, everybody else will be talking about as well. Staying with child-related matters now, but before, and I don't really get snotty messages anymore about child-related matters because I think everybody understands that child-related matters are the building blocks of society. Particularly if you're old and child-free, then you should be more interested in what's going on at the other end of the generational ladder than almost anybody else is, because you're going to rely upon other people's children or grandchildren in some way, shape or form for your security and quite possibly for your health care or your social care. And if not the actual individuals, then the money that will subsidise it and keep the wheels of our economy turning. So staying in similar territory, but actually a question that has never occurred to me before. There's a story last week about the number of secondary school teachers who are men also falling to a record low. So it's a day of record lows, isn't it? It's all about the record lows today. Not the weather, but birth rate, record low, and number of secondary school teachers who are men, also a record low. I wonder whether that's linked. I wonder whether I've actually not knitted together as many stories as I could have done this morning. The problem is if I knit them all together, then I've run out of topics. I've only got one topic left. But that is probably loosely linked to the conversation in the last hour because, of course, the rewards for being a teacher have plummeted in recent years. And so it's probably less attractive, I don't know, to men than it used to be because as a full-time career, when you're not taking any time off to have children, it is less attractive than it used to be. I don't know. And there's a story about police officers getting teased if they take paternity leave, which speaks of a social attitude to parenting that needs a bit of help. But I'm doing it again. I'm doing Monday. I've got Monday morning-itis. I'm like the kid in The Sixth Sense, except where he sees dead people, I see links between all the stories in the news that don't necessarily exist. So let's stop that now. Let's ring-fence this story. This is a story all about how my life got turned upside. No, this is a story all about how the number of secondary school teachers who are men has fallen to a record low. And it's linked to the Andrew Tate stuff and the adolescent stuff that we talked about last week, if you believe that an absence of male role models is a major problem. Two thoughts. First thought, amazing caller, last week or the week before, who blew a hole in the whole conversation, every conversation that's ever been had on radio phone-in programmes about male role models. And I think I was guilty of this as well back in the day. But, sometimes, it doesn't happen anymore, thank goodness. But way back in the day when I was still earning my spurs, when I was still learning the ropes, and I never stopped learning the ropes, but I would think, I'd hear someone else doing a subject. And I'd think, that must be a good subject. But I wasn't really operating as a listener. I was operating as a presenter in search of a topic. They're two very different things. A presenter in search of a topic is listening, but is not a listener in the pure sense of the word. Someone fully engaged or someone authentically engaged with what is coming out of the radio. So I'd hear someone else having a conversation about male role models and I'd think, I'll do that next time it comes up as a subject. And I'd do it in the way that everybody else did it. And I would invite you to ring in and name some male role models. So we'd all sit here going, oh, yeah, David Beckham, he's all right. Oh, Jamie Oliver, yeah, because he can cook as well. So, he's a... And it was it's going back a while now. But I knew that they were not the kind of conversations we should have been having together. They didn't feel... What's the word I want? Nourishing. Nourishing is the word that I want. The difference between how easy it is to make the phones ring, if you like, and how hard it is to get callers who really make you think about things. It's what keeps me coming to work every morning. And we took a call a week and a half or so ago from a bloke who veered into the territory of role models, probably a conversation about adolescence or an attendant issue to that and the plight of young boys in our society at the moment. And he just talked about how role models should be the bloke who's holding it all together, the bloke who loves his partner, the bloke who is there for his children, the bloke who might not have a Ferrari parked outside the house, but who is in it, the house, as often as he can be, as much as he can be, to be present for his children. And therefore a teacher could be a role model as well. And I thought that was such an insightful contribution. I also thought it spoke to to refer back to adolescence briefly, it spoke also to a crisis of fatherhood in a way, and that even in functional nuclear families, in families where the overall mood is good and dad is a presence, he's often not. You know, we still, I think, worship at the altar of good fathering involving breadwinning and therefore being out all the time, working, crucially and increasingly, is evidence of committed parenting. But that's an environment in which your 14-year-old son can be spending his life terminally online. It's so tricky, that, because I am going out to work. I'm going to do all the shifts that I can do. And the dad in adolescence was a tradesman, wasn't he? So he would be going out doing jobs at all hours of the day. And that's good dadding. That's the message that we get. Is he going to be out? And it proves how much I love my family. The more I'm not there, the more I prove that I love them. Have you ever thought of that before? I don't know that I have. There's a side order of really loving your job as well, of course, in some but not all cases. But generally speaking, there's a difference between mothers and fathers. Generally speaking, please don't think that this is a claim to the universal. But a dad proves how much he loves his family by not being there. And what do you want from your dad when you're little? Do you want him saying yes to all the overtime under the sun? Do you want him out, in my case, covering the miners' strike for almost a year in which we never saw him, knowing that he loves us and that on some level he's doing this because he loves us, to provide us with all the things that we've got? Or do you want him kicking a football with you in the back garden on Sunday afternoon, or bowling at you until you finally learn how to do a decent forward defence? What do you want from your dad? So that's thought number one on this story about role models. Thought number two came from the producer, came from Eleanor, who, as you can probably work out from the name, is a woman. And Eleanor said to me last week, and it's been really playing in my mind, this question. She said, why do the role models have to be male? What difference does it make? Why is a story about a decline in secondary school teachers who are men also, in the hands of almost every commentator and journalist, also a story about toxic male role models stepping into a space that has been vacated by traditional or healthy male role models? So the Daily Mail coverage of this story last week brought Andrew Tate, the self-proclaimed misogynist, into the third paragraph. They are calling for, experts are calling for, a targeted recruitment campaign to bring more positive male role models for boys into the classroom. This was in the Sunday Times last week. It's a report that the Higher Education Policy published last Thursday. Government will be asked to create a minister whose role would include overseeing training more male teachers. There's been a decline since the 1990s. And until Eleanor asked me that question, I'd never actually thought of it before. Who decided that boys need male role models? I'm not going to lie to you. In my bones, I think they do. But I can't really tell you why. I can't really point to, I mean, apart from my dad as a male role model, but remember, as I've said, his job was hardcore, was not a constant presence in our childhood. And then I went away to boarding school, which again was an expression of commitment and love because of the financial sacrifices that it involved. But if I could rewrite the story of my life, I would spend more time with my dad as a child and possibly as an adult as well, if I could have done. So that's not role modeling in the way that this story suggests. It means I look at him and see someone who was committed to his family and prioritized them above almost everything else, and who worked bloody hard to provide them with the things that he felt they deserved and wanted. But my mum could have done all of those things, and in many ways did. But she provided nurture, she provided warmth, home. Why why do boys need male role models? Can you do that? Coming at it from that angle, that if you asked any man what he wants from his dad when he was a boy, it would just be time, wouldn't it? It would just be time and company. But why does it have to be a man? Why do boys need male role models? Explain it to a woman who doesn't get it. Explain it to me, who kind of gets it but can't explain why. And in the spirit of what was it like, how do you think? I have a few people picking up on representation. You can't be what you can't see. And I get that. So a teacher then perhaps becomes a male role model. So here is a man, and I am a boy. And when I grow up, I will be a man. And here is an example of what a good man looks like. But why does it have to be a man? Why can't it just be a human? And if you don't think you had good male role models growing up, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. But second of all, how does it affect you? So what are we playing with here? What are we risking by having children growing up, by having boys growing up without, quotes, male, end quotes, role models? Question number one, why do they have to be male? But question number two, what is the problem here? If we accept, and it's up to you whether or not it becomes a completely proven point, if we accept that boys need male role models and we come to a better understanding of why they have to be male, then what are we worrying about? What is the potential problem on the horizon? And you might be best placed to answer that if, looking back, you can say, I don't think I did have a good male role model. And that is why today I am this or that or the other. Hit the numbers now. You will get. It's important, this, because there's a sort of, what's the word? A blithe acceptance of the idea that this is correct. A lack of male role models, a lack of male teachers in secondary school is a, quotes, bad thing, end quotes, right? Why? I'll take anything you've got on this. You don't have to be a man to do it either. It could be a mum, could be anyone can answer this question. But why? Why is a lack of male teachers in secondary schools a bad thing? And what does a lack of male role models actually mean in the context of the life that you lead? It's 11:17. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Help me out on this one, because I thought it was a silly question when Eleanor asked it, and then I tried to answer it and I realised it wasn't a silly question at all. Why does it matter? Why do these role models have to be male? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:19. I'll read a couple of texts, then we'll hit the phones. And I think Nick and Emma represent two very different poles, opposite poles almost, in this conversation. Emma writes, because we put too much emphasis on gender. It shouldn't be this is what a man is or this is what a woman is. It should be this is what a decent person is. Right? So hold that thought. And Nick writes, things that men have that women don't, ? Testosterone, greater physical strength, more intense love of sports, violent urges. Maybe boys need a guide for all these, and women, in my experience, suck at all of them. I mean, who'd you rather have a cup of tea with? First question. Emma, suggesting that it'd be good if we put some emphasis on everybody being good, all humans being nice, or Nick, who thinks that women suck at physical strength, sports, violent urges. How can you suck at violent urges, mate? What do you mean by that? I mean, they're not very good at being violent. But obviously, it's a point, it's a view, it's a decision. Men do, we believe, societally, have different attributes from women, and that is why they need male role models. But if all the explanations of why are going to sound like that, then the problem probably isn't going to get solved. Simeon is in Tampere in Finland. Simeon, what would you like to say?
Yeah, right, so in my personal opinion, and I don't know if this goes against data and studies, but I don't think the gender is that important. But I'd also say that teachers as a whole are not as important as role models in the sense that I've had some incredible teachers, both male and female.
Yes.
But I've never looked up to them as people, in a sense. Like, if they've been nice, they've been smart, awesome, fun. But I've never thought, I want to copy your behavior and act like you as a whole.
How old are you now?
25.
And where do you derive your idea of what a 25-year-old man should look like? I don't mean your grooming decisions. I mean the idea in your head of what a 25-year-old man should be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Some of it, I'm sure, in some ways, parenting, which I think also relates to what you were just commenting on a second ago, because many people, including my own mom, they'll say that, I'm a woman, so I can't do, I don't know, I can't change the tire of a car.
Sure.
Your dad should do it because he's a man.
Nor can most men these days. That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, if Eleanor said to you, why do boys need male role models? Not why do they need role models, but why do they need male role models? What would you say?
I'd say it goes back to what you were saying a moment ago about representation. I think it's a simple answer, but in many ways I think it's also... Yeah.
Isn't it? Because it's just, you can't be what you can't see. There is some truth in that, but what can you see? Because a man is not a role model simply by dint of being a man. So it's not representation. It's got to be more than that. It has to be a man who is a good role model, as opposed to the role models that they're picking in the manosphere or in the sort of toxic online community who are appalling role models. So just being a man isn't enough. It's not just representation. I like that question, Simeon. Is where do I get my idea of what a 53-year-old man should be? Answer: I mean, I'm inspired by my father and his example in many ways, but not completely. It's not the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. Therapy taught me an awful lot about what I should be doing, but not as a man, as a human being. So I'm leaning towards Emma now. And why do we put a specific emphasis on the masculinity element of it? That's why Eleanor asks, why does it have to be a man? Emily's in Haringey. Emily, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's like advertising, isn't it? We know that advertising works. It doesn't matter how it works. We just know it works. And lots of good, positive
there are PhDs. There are people gnashing their teeth upstairs in this building who are absolutely obsessed with how it works. But you carry on. I take your point.
Yeah. But it works, right? It works. You see things often enough, you aspire to them.
Yes.
So the more positive male role models my children see, because I'm a boy mum and not a girl mum,
yes,
is great. But I'm also really conscious of them having positive female roles. It's not. I mean, I want them to have lots of role models. But yeah, I think that there is a real issue there.
But what is the difference? What is the thing? I mean, it's almost what is the definition
they're boys. They know they're boys.
So it has to be a man. So it has to be a man.
Well, I think it's for that particular element of their brain.
Yeah.
So they can have good role models for women. They can have good for different bits. It's really important that I'm a good female role model for them, and women around me are. But they definitely need the other bit. It's not. I think it's possible to have like all these different little points of view and little bits adding to what we're not just made of one thing, are we?
Yes.
Everything is part of what we're made of. So in a way, it's not that complicated.
Except it's too too complicated to articulate. Because it's innate.
I think we just have to accept it.
No, but that's what I mean. You can't. It can't be both. Because you said we don't know how advertising works, but we just know that it does.
Yeah.
In fact, huge amounts of effort and energy are put into working out how advertising works.
Yeah.
So I mean, the question that I think underpins this, and where your answer it just is close to irresistible, is what can a man do that a woman can't do? And your answer is be a man.
Yeah, be a man. But that doesn't mean to say, because I'm really careful, conscious around my boys about kind of belittling men, because I've spoken on LBC about how I became a single parent and my boy's dad is ill in a care home. So I'm really careful. I don't want to do everything because I don't want them to question where they fit in as men.
But what can't you do?
I mean, Well, I can actually do everything, but I want to teach them.
So why does it matter then? So we're back to Eleanor's question. If you can do everything, why does a man have to do some of it? What's the difference? What's gained from that?
Right, and I don't want them to feel stuff robbed from them. I don't want them to feel like, well, there's no point in me being a good man because women can do it all. So I get them to help me do stuff.
Right.
You see what I mean? So if we've got this world where women are doing everything, men are doing nothing.
Yeah, but that's not the world. No,
feel a little bit rubbish about.
Maybe
well, I don't know. I think that's why so many boys are kind of not. Are falling into the trouble of what they're falling into, like in adolescence and stuff.
But the dad in adolescence was great. I mean, in many ways, he was the model dad. He was going out, working really hard, had a good relationship with his boy. I mean, he had some anger issues of his own. I don't know whether that is the violent urges that our earlier texter was referring to. And that was a functional nuclear family. And they fell down the rabbit hole. So I don't know that there was an absence of male role models there necessarily, but maybe. I think, I mean, to be fair, I think it's hard to get past that answer you gave without necessarily realising you were giving it, which is what we all say to our children at certain points in their childhood, and it is, why do we have to do? Why? And the answer is because I say so. Why does it matter? Because it does. It's the answer of every parent and every mother, every father throughout the ages. But we're trying to go a little bit further. Where does it go? Where does it go? Why does it matter? 0345 606 0973. Because, I mean, listen, here's a message from Dal who's written, man bashing again, James. So very angry men who can't articulate their feelings are the worst kinds of role model. And yet, as your man here kind of proves, they're the ones that feel most aggrieved and most entitled to dominate a conversation. That's not a good role model. This isn't man bashing. Why do young boys need male role models? Because it feels absolutely true that they do. But I want to know why. And if it sounds like man-bashing, then there is a man who was once a boy who didn't have good male role models. There is a man who was once a boy who was taught that feelings don't matter, who was taught that anger is good, that violent urges are a exclusively masculine preserve. I love the line, you can't be what you can't see, when it comes to accessing areas of society in which you are not represented. But what does it mean in this context? And therefore, why does it matter that the number of secondary school teachers who are men is at an all-time low? John's in Stroud. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you again. It's been a while. In my view, what it is the clue's in the name. A role model doesn't just mean a good example. A role model models a particular role. And when you're a kid growing up, in fact, way into adulthood as well, we're trying to work out who we are. You know, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be all the things that I am, all the things that I identify as? So, you know, in school, what does it mean to be a student? I'm here to study. What does it mean to be a student? You know, is it like that kid over there who's always backchatting the teacher and looking out the window? Is it like that kid who's got their head down? And you don't necessarily take your role models consciously. You know, you take from the people. Yeah, exactly.
So in a school, No Hostages makes this point rather well. In a school, it's not about. I don't know if he's agreeing with you, actually, when you talked about the modelling of the role. Encouraging more men to teach isn't about boys needing male teachers. It's about showing that care, patience and teaching are not women's work. So diverse role models expand what all kids see as possible and what all kids see as worth valuing. So in fact, what a male teacher can do is complement what the hardworking dad who's out all the time does by showing a boy that men can be caring as well, nurturing as well. Even strict teachers have a compassion at their core that we can all remember from 30 or 40 years ago.
God, I think that's brilliantly put.
I do too.
That's. I'll go now. That's
well, we're all a team, aren't we? That's from No Hostages. That's the account name they use on Blue Sky, and a regular contributor to the programme with pearls of insight like that one. So I'd missed that. So here is a man, here is a boy. The boy wants to be like that man, but no. Here is a dad doing a great job, but here is a male teacher showing another facet of manhood, masculinity. But why does it have to be a man? Because I'm a boy and I'm going to be a man when I grow up. Maybe it is that simple. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. It's not simple, is it? I took two messages quickly, both from blokes. Peter, and I think close to something really crucial here. Peter writes, the answer to why do boys need good male role models is the same answer to the question of why do girls need to see visible examples of women working as CEOs. It's about seeing a representation of yourself. Andrew Tate and the rest succeed by showing young boys how they could be. And yet, most of the boys who've fallen under the spells of a Tate have got dads at home or in their lives, have got, quotes, male role models, end quotes. So are there two conversations here? One about lads who haven't and one about lads who have. Until you remember that concept of complementariness, if that's a word. So, yeah, your dad does this. But look, here's another man who can also be a role model. And sometimes, as Gary reminds me, sometimes a role model is about doing the opposite, about someone showing you where not to go. And this is from John. It's not all about bits of their brain. It's about representation and relatability. In the same way that we spend a lot of effort trying to increase representation of minority ethnicities, orientation, gender equality in what we see on TV and the rest, to show youngsters in those demographics that they can be an actor or a CEO, etc. The main characters we see for young men are either online personalities, where morals regularly come second to clicks, engagement and revenue, or footballers, where we've had 2 or 3 generations of young lads thrust into high-pressure arenas with little to no emotional support for them in their sport. And they don't have examples to follow either. But they have huge wages. So high-profile young men that a developing young man will see today are technically all flawed characters as the result of the position that society has placed them in. And no, I'm not going to argue with the next bit. We need more Gary Linekers and fewer Instagram gym bros, but this will require a whole culture shift. But how do dads feel listening to this? You thought you were the role model. You listen to this, you realise it's not enough. There's more. Why do they need a teacher? And of course, why does right-wing media spend its life attacking Gary Lineker when he is all of the things that John suggests? And when young men like Marcus Rashford displayed social conscience, the usual suspects were queuing up to attack them. In fact, precisely the sort of people who would argue that we need more male role models generally attack men in public life who try to get in touch with something valuable, something precious, from Prince Harry to Marcus Rashford. Jamie Oliver tries to improve the food that we eat and he gets attacked. I don't know why. It might be a coincidence. It might just be the 2-minute hate. But where do dads fit into this? Boys need dads or male role models, obviously, writes Anne, because a woman can't fill a young man in regarding masculine needs, which are totally different from girls' and women's needs. You're going to have to expand a little bit on that, Anne, and bring it into the realm of role model as well. I mean, does a male teacher teach boys differently from how he teaches girls? I don't think so. But he provides something different to boys from what he provides to girls. Daniel's in Croydon. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
It was just pretty good. It was just in connection to the guy's text, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's the fact that it's relatable. Like a young boy relates to another young boy and obviously going to eventually relate to a man. But I think we have this one life, right? But everybody experiences it differently. And that could be on many different levels, but on a male and a female level, a female has a different experience to a male when approaching this life. So I believe having good role models as males is important to young boys because they can relate to that. An older man can always steer a young boy in a different way because he's experienced it already and has faced challenges in different aspects of life, and then he can now coach a young boy because he's been through that. And I think that's why it's very important to have good role models and a lot of good male role models, not just one.
Yeah, I think that's the point.
We need a community.
Yeah, that is missing from these conversations quite often, isn't it? And that's why it always felt unsatisfying to me to do phone-ins where you'd ring in and name someone, and then we'd have a conversation about whether or not they were a good role model. It's about a village. It's about a village raising a child, isn't it? Really.
Exactly. I really do think that. Yeah.
But give me some detail. Can you put examples in place that where it has to be a man that can do that role, that can play that role?
For example, okay, let's go to, since we're in the realm of school and in the realm of teenagers, let's go to puberty, for example.
Yeah.
The male experience through puberty is very different to the female experience through puberty. So even when a man's growing up, even the flood of testosterone, for example, a young man without guidance may not be able to handle all that testosterone at once.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So therefore, you may need another male advice who has been through puberty, and to sit the young boy down and be like, look, I understand how you're feeling. I felt this way as well, and this is how I approached it. And that testosterone, that experience of testosterone doesn't happen in women, or unless I'm mistaken.
No, I don't think it does.
Happen in women. So it will be hard for a woman to really understand and then coach that young boy.
And vice versa. I mean, we're talking about raging hormones, and women get their share of that as well as boys do through puberty and beyond. How much of what we're talking about is men need examples of how to treat women?
Okay, I think definitely that's something that
because you move your mum out of the picture, even if your parents have got a good relationship and they're still together. You're online. You're in this toxic manosphere. Your mum and your sister aren't women in that set. Do you see what I mean? So even though your dad treats your mum respectfully, it's not enough. You need to see it outside the house with other women. Is that?
I think you're right, because that's why I think it goes back to our point of we need a community of men. We need a community of good role models, because you're right. Even you can have as much guidance in the home, but as soon as if you don't see that experience outside of the home, especially as a young boy growing up, your house may just seem like a little bubble.
Yes,
and there's a disconnect with your house and the outside world. So I do think, it's a tough one, to be honest. You've even got me thinking right now.
Good.
Speaking.
No, well, it's tougher than it looks.
But it makes sense. It makes sense.
It does make sense. And of course, if you've got, it's a bit Trumpish, this, but if you're trying to denigrate education, if you're trying to undermine the importance of education and empathy, then having a preponderance of female teachers at exactly the point you describe, at puberty, at the peak of teenage resentment, you could call it, they become so much more malleable and so much more easily persuaded of things that are not healthy. But it catch them at that age, and there's no other men around to simply provide contrast by their very existence, then they're more likely to fall down these holes, I think. Thank you, Daniel. Linton's in Wood Green. Linton, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Good conversation. Thank you. I was raised up in a children's home about 30, 40 years ago, where all the people looking after us were women.
Yeah.
So all of my role models were women. And I don't think you need to have real male role models or boys. Now, why I say that is because I was looking out very young for people who could take care of us, protect us, bring the best out of us, listen to us.
Yes.
Which is what I think you need as a child growing up. And those women did that. Now, the generation of women who brought me up were ones who had to step in during World War II. So they took on all those roles. But then the main woman who raised me, she gave her life to bringing up children.
Yeah.
And I looked around me for men who were role models, and there were none in the staff. And the guys surrounding me, the older ones, we were all in a children's home. So there's very mixed,
of course,
abilities, mixed generation. So I think what I'm basically saying is I think we place too much emphasis on finding role models of the same sex.
And yet, how can a woman teach a boy what a man can be or should be.
Men can't teach men what men are.
They can show them.
They can't really, and that's one of the things we're having at the moment with this manosphere.
Yeah.
What part of that question, the central part of it, is what is a man?
Yes.
And there are very different definitions depending upon where you look at. Some people would say a man is someone like Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
Some people would say, you may remember someone like Wayne Steep, the ballet dancer. He's still a man. Some boys would aspire to be like him. So I don't think it takes a man to describe what a man is or show what a man is. Because what is a man?
Well, I wonder whether the world has changed since your childhood and my childhood. We're of a similar age. This is from Jack. You're putting the symptoms before the cause. A young lad today goes online and is fed a constant stream of why he's awful, why being young and white makes him guilty by association, why he's part of rape culture, despite never having a girlfriend. I'm going to clarify that slightly because I was about to bite Jack's head off. I don't think that that's what they encounter, people telling them that they're young and white and that makes them guilty by association. But they're constantly told that's what other people are saying. They're not accessing these actual opinions. They're just being spoon-fed the story of this is what the world thinks. It's not true, but it's intoxicating because then they turn to the only major space that's telling them they're not awful. Demonize a child and he'll grow into a demon. I think Jack's wrong because it's the people who are radicalizing them that are telling them that everybody thinks they're awful. Nobody's actually telling them that they're awful. That's the big myth of the manosphere, but it's a pressure that you never experienced. And so while you can say, I didn't need one, what is the star? What's the lodestar that offers a contrast to what they're finding online? They need something to point at and say that is a contrast of masculinity. And I don't know that a woman can do that.
I disagree because even when we were younger, you still had lots of people saying to you, "This is what it means to be a man." So, and you play football. Can you do this? Can you do that? We just had it more direct. And we weren't so isolated when we received it. So I think a lot of my friends, I turned out to be a barrister.
Yes.
Because I took an independent view almost of who my role models were. I had some friends who bought into this hyper-masculine, aggressive role that you're supposed to be as a man, or they taught, and they went off on a different way completely. And I think part of that is because the manosphere has changed insofar as it's now digital, but it's always been there. And which is why you talk to people like Andrew Tate and they say things like, I looked at my dad and my dad did this and my dad wouldn't take this from my mum because he was a proper man.
Yeah, but then you need someone to challenge what a proper man is. And I think for pubescent boys, and your experiences are obviously true for you, but I don't know that we can extrapolate from them something that would be true for society, because a young boy, particularly at that age, at the peak of teenage resentment or at their most malleable, their most impressionable, one man comes along and says, this is what masculinity looks like, and it's misogynistic and it's violent, it's unpleasant. And I don't know that a woman can then stand up and say, no, this is what a real man looks like. For a young boy, it needs to be another man, I think. I mean, I don't know that this is a binary argument, but it's a fascinating conversation, much more fascinating than just inviting people to ring in and tell me who they think makes a great male role model. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm struck by that text where I see it a lot. Young boys, particularly white boys, are constantly being told that they're part of rape culture and that it's just not true. It's like the free speech conversation, isn't it? You remember when people claimed that they were passionately opposed to cancel culture and the great champions of free speech, and then Donald Trump started deporting people who hadn't done anything wrong and having people rounded up off the streets for expressing opinions, telling French companies that if they didn't apply with his anti-diversity orders, then they wouldn't be able to do business. And people were fetishizing sovereignty, and people who claimed to be anti-woke were passionately opposed to, university campuses not being spaces where you could say whatever you wanted. And they're all silent now. So it's often the case that you groom someone by telling them that someone else is doing to them what you actually want to do to them. So you go online and you find people who claim that white boys are constantly being told that they are this, that, and the other. These are people who are spending their entire lives maligning black boys. You know, the accounts that claim all crime is committed by black boy. How does a black boy feel growing up when you actually exist and you're saying that ethnicity is a precursor of criminality, that your ethnicity determines whether you're likely to be a criminal or not? White boys don't put up with that. The only people telling them that they do are the people who want you to believe that all crimes are committed by ethnic minorities. So I missed the backlash on adolescence. I had no idea there were people out there, some of whom recently convicted of kicking their own wife in the head, who were claiming, and Elon Musk inevitably joined in, claiming that one of the authors of Adolescence, Jack Thorne, was speaking to John Sopel on Newsagents last week, and you could hear the incredulity that anybody would claim that they'd based it on a black killer, but made him white for, quotes, reasons, end quotes. So the people peddling lies like that are the same people telling boys that they are being blamed for this and blamed for that and blamed for the other. I do this for a living. I am a king of woke. I never hear these voices unless they've been booked by a producer on a right-wing program who's desperate to find someone to come on and say the things that you need them to say in order to pretend that there's a problem. And you hear the calls sometimes. Producers trying to find someone to come on and say something provocative in that space. And it just doesn't exist. But of course, you tell someone that they're being victimized, you tell someone that they're being treated unfairly, they're not going to ask for proof. They're going to ask for revenge. And that's where Andrew Tate comes in. So that's where I disagree with Linton, in that I do think that standing up to a certain type of radicalizing groomer demands another man. Elise, picking up just on precisely the points I just made. There's a Venn diagram, she writes, of these anti-immigrant racist right-wingers and the Andrew Tate types. It's two fully overlapping circles. And it is, because you're telling these kids that they're victims and that they are entitled to their misogyny, whereas actually a good male role model is teaching them how to be happy. There it is. Sometimes happens, doesn't it? You look at Andrew Tate, you see a happy man. Do you? A man comfortable in his own skin? A man who often takes a moment out of his day to marvel at the wonder of the world and the beauty of humanity? You see a happy man, a secure man, a compassionate man? That's why you need male role models. But I'm not quite sure that you need them for the reasons that a lot of people who shout the loudest about masculinity understand. Because the people who shout the loudest about masculinity, I think, are the very best advertisements of what happens when you don't have good male role models, teaching by example empathy and compassion and decency and strength, a specific type of strength of character, not strength of opinion or strength of violence. But that's what happens, isn't it? Happy. Teaching boys how to be happy. You think they get happy when they spend their life online being exposed to toxic influence? Think that makes them happy? John's in Upminster. John, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for having me on, James.
You're very welcome.
Basically, I as a young person, my father left when I was 2.
Yeah.
I grew up just with my mum. I didn't feel as if I needed that role model of a father to put me in the right place. You know, my mum was worked her whole life. She went to work every day, 5 days a week. She wouldn't get back sometimes till 6-7 o'clock at night.
So she was a parenting role model.
Yeah, she was there for us on the weekend. She kept a roof over our head. She kept our clothes on our back. What more of a role model do you need?
Well, I wonder whether in the course of this hour we've answered that question. And we didn't answer it at the beginning because we couldn't. But the answer is that you and Linton were not exposed to the toxicity. Had you been online while your mum was out all hours of the day and you were being groomed by a man accused of rape, you were being groomed by a self-confessed misogynist, you were being groomed by an accused people trafficker, and then you were turning on your telly and Nigel Farage popped up claiming to be part of the same phenomenon as the man accused of rape and sexual and sex trafficking. And then you turned on your American thing and Donald Trump standing up, offering up another man who never looks happy. Happy is a fascinating thing to have stumbled across at the end of this conversation. You were happy growing up, but if you'd had all these influences pulling you towards unhappiness, then maybe you would have needed or benefited from a male role model. You just were born in a simpler time.
The problem is that, I mean, I grew up with, you know, when MSN and things like that were all coming in, and YouTube was coming in. You saw these videos and things. But the thing is, the way I look at it was, yes, my father wasn't there, but he taught me probably one of the most critical things in life of how not to be.
Yeah.
You know, not to be that man that he became. He wasn't the
So he was an
man.
anti role model.
Yeah. But
and that's really powerful.
In doing that, yeah, exactly. You know, he's not there. But it still taught me a lesson of the way not to be in life, you know. But to have a role model of...
He was an unhappy man, I suspect, your dad?
Very. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. I mean, fortunately, he's passed away now, but he passed away alone. Nobody around him, you know. Not the person... I mean, I'm a father now.
Sure.
I've got a 18-month-old. But the way I look, I've got a little girl.
Yeah.
Now, the way I look at it is not just do boys need a role model, a male role model. Shouldn't all children, you know, in either whether they're there or not, they need to learn these aspects of what a man maybe should be and not do, maybe.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly. Yeah, I mean, three things actually from the whole hour. The first is that I think for once, there are generational challenges that are new and different, albeit that they might be part of a historical pattern, but it's why some of us perhaps feel we don't need it. Number two, it's a human thing. It's a people thing. And number three, for me, when you talk about the lack of necessity of a male role model, in a way, by saying that your dad was your anti-role model, you're arguing with your own point, because he had to be your dad to play that role in your formation, albeit that his influence was negative, his impact was accidentally positive because you determined that you didn't want to be like him. But I think happy is the word, that's it, isn't it? That's the big word this hour. They need happy role models, not angry, women-hating, violence fetishizing freaks. They need happy male role models.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12, as you've heard, Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far-right National Rally Party in France and daughter of the leader of the far-right Front National Party in France, has been banned from public office for 5 years. That rules her out of the imminent presidential election in 2027, where I think she was leading the polls. And she's also been given a prison sentence, but it's not clear if she'll actually spend any time in jail. Embezzlement, in case you were wondering, with far-right politicians. It's usually a fairly good bet that there'll be some embezzlement in place, and it is using EU funds to fund her domestic political party that I think makes up the bulk of the conviction. I'll take a guest on that later. I want to know a little bit more about what went on in court and what implications or ramifications it might have. But misusing funds is the technical phrase, embezzlement in old money, and a 5-year ban from running for office. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. Right, Monday morning itis kicks in once again. Because if you are... So the stories that have entertained us today, the middle one I think is separate. But if you go back to the first hour, when we were talking about falling birth rates, increasing number of young people who don't want to have children or feel that they can't afford to or justify having children, two potentially very different things. But looking at cost of living, looking at the fact that Generation Z or Z are, that's sort of 29 and down, are much more concerned about what we would traditionally describe as grown-up matters like work and money than they are about things like culture wars and the rest of it. And looking also at the morning after, well, the morning after pill probably doesn't play into that story. But yes, I give you a side order of the second hour of the programme, a lack of, or worries about a lack of male role models. A lot of it boils down to the social contract. A lot of it boils down to that sense that many, many callers now tell me, and it comes from almost all corners of the country, both geographically and socioeconomically, that I've kept my end of the bargain and society hasn't kept its. I think the rot set in 2010 with the coalition government, certainly with the introduction of austerity. This is why, for me at least, and I appreciate not everybody will like this, and I may well be proved horribly wrong, to claim that what the Labour Party is doing at the moment is austerity 2.0 is a mistake. I don't approve, or I am likely not to approve when the detail becomes clear of some of the cuts that they have made to disability benefits. But they are not cutting welfare in order to protect banks or further enrich the wealthy. They are cutting welfare in order, they would argue, to make the lot of the, quotes, ordinary working person, end quotes, better, to ease the burden on the ordinary working person. It's why they've taken away pensioners' winter fuel allowance. It's why they have closed a loophole that allowed farmers to avoid all of the inheritance tax that anybody else in our society inheriting a similarly sized estate would be required to pay. Farmers will now pay half of what everybody else would be required to pay. It's why they're not taking any prisoners on the VAT on school fees question. They are not seeking to take money from citizens in order to protect the banks who caused the global financial crisis, or simply cut the taxes of the richest people in the country. So it may turn out to be a horrible, horrible error, but it's not the same calculation that underpinned austerity. It's profoundly and obviously different, and anybody claiming otherwise has either not thought about it properly or is lying. But the social contract still feels broken. Do you know what social capital is? It's one of the many, 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 many things you have introduced to me over the years that we've spent together. You've educated me in this field. So I think when I have had conversations in the past about home ownership, the mistake I made was to think, and there was a great caller in the last hour actually who talked about the dustman's daughter, who talked about growing up in a council house. That was part of the social contract, but it wasn't capital. So I have this slightly Dickensian approach to capital. You've got to have capital to feel secure. You've got to have capital to feel like a stakeholder in society. It's not true. If you had social capital, you felt like a stakeholder in society. And social capital is everything. The NHS is social capital. It belongs to you and to me. Council housing is social capital, whether you live in it or not. It belongs to you and to me. It's social capital. Sure Start centres were social capital. Things, youth clubs, social capital. Things that you can take out of society in return for whatever it is you put in. And of course, some of us like to put in to society so that others can take out of society. And that should be regarded as a good thing. That's a good role model, to say that if you're lucky enough to have quite a lot, you should be chipping in to help people who don't. Social capital. I wonder if anything is more important to the concept of social capital than rented property. I really do. Because if you've got a mortgage, you're in charge, right? It might cost a fortune and it might be unfair, but if your cellar is riddled with mould, you can get rid of it. And you can justify getting rid of it because one day you're going to sell that property and you'll get your money back. Or at least you won't be penalised for not having fixed it. Paint is peeling, then you're going to sell that property one day. So if you give it a lick of paint, you get the money back. Also, even now, when things are moving relatively slowly, your property is going up in value most years, if not all years, despite the best efforts of Liz Truss. So you have capital, but you don't have social capital. If you rent, whether it's from a private landlord or a public sector landlord, you only have social capital if it feels like you do. It's not enough to just have a roof over your head. You have to feel safe. Did you know that senior Tories and landlords, the biggest landlords in the country, have been meeting up to discuss ways of thwarting the Renters' Rights Bill? The Renters' Rights Bill is another thing that you can put in the ledger as proof that this current government is not doing austerity 2.0. The Renters' Rights Bill is absolutely legislation designed to look after ordinary people at the expense of plutocrats, at the expense of the very wealthy. And if you're a landlord and you're not very wealthy, then I'm not talking about you, because you're not the kind of landlord who leaves your tenants living in squalor or leaves them homeless because of no-fault evictions. Because you might not be wealthy, but if you do those things, you're bad. You're a bad landlord. And the Renters' Rights Bill is designed to address chiefly three areas. It will stop landlords from undertaking no-fault evictions. This should kick in as soon as the bill gets royal assent. And just think about that. I have some sympathy if you have a buy-to-let property, if you have an investment property. I have some sympathy with the idea that you kind of need to have a bit of nimbleness, a bit of fluidity. It's your asset. But I have more sympathy for the person who describes it as their home. Call me a communist if you want. So I have some sympathy for your relationship with your asset. I have more sympathy for your tenant's relationship with their home. So no-fault evictions have gone. You can't just get a phone call one day telling you, you've got to be out by the end of next month. What's not to like? The second thing that the Tories and the big landlords are unhappy about is accepting more rent than the amount for which a property is listed. So starting auctions, if you like, the renter's equivalent of sealed bids, which sends prices skyrocketing and also is so dependent upon the wax and wane of variables that you could end up signing up for a long lease at a fee that the landlord never would have got 6 months later. So you can't treat a rental property like an auction. You cannot accept more money than it's been advertised for. So you advertise for what you're hoping to get for it, and if you get it, you get it. You can't have Billy Big Bananas turning up and beating your bid, because you've advertised the price that it's going to be rented for. And the third thing is Awab's Law. Awab, you'll remember, is the lad who died. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. A-W-A-A-B. He is the boy, Awab Ishak, who died due to a respiratory condition caused by mould in his social housing. And what Awab's Law will do is force landlords to do essential repairs within fixed time periods. So let's just run through those three things, right? Your landlord will have to do essential repairs within fixed time periods. Your landlord will not be able to chuck you out for no reason, according to his or her whim. And your landlord will not be able to accept, or a landlord will not be able to accept offers from the highest bidder in a way that artificially inflates rental prices. What are the Tories doing? Senior Conservatives have held private talks with big landlords about how to thwart the government's Renters' Rights Bill. The Guardian has learned, with ideas including launching a legal challenge under human rights law. Big fans of human rights law, apparently, until they're not, until it's other humans that start exercising them. So the shadow housing minister, it's reported today, recently hosted a meeting with several of the country's largest landlords and estate agents to discuss ways to delay or stop the bill. They talked about court challenges. They talked about repeated rounds of Lords amendments, according to 3 people in attendance. So it's triple sourced. First rule of journalism is everything has to be double sourced, although it's a rule that many people don't seem to be aware of these days. And the discussions have prompted, obviously, accusations of collusion between the Tories and the property industry. How hard is it? Some people listening to this programme will have been renters forever. Has it got worse? You know how much I like Pendula, don't you? Or pendulums, if you prefer. I think almost all of the conversations we have sometimes are susceptible to the theory of the pendulum. So pendulums, by definition, swing. And they swing from one extreme to the other extreme. And somewhere in the middle, for about 10 minutes, usually on a Tuesday afternoon, everything is just perfect. But then the pendulum carries on swinging, and the bias moves to the other side of the debate. I don't think that in the relationship between landlords and tenants, I don't think the pendulum has ever swung in favour of the tenant. Has it? Do you? I think that it's always sat on the land. So, I mean, it's not a pendulum, is it? Because it stopped swinging. But you take my point. It's a figure of speech. It's a metaphor. It's an allegory. Even Michael Gove recognised this. And I say even Michael Gove because he was a damaging and ridiculous figure in so many ways. But he did attempt to enact similar proposals when he was Housing Secretary to act for renters. His bill failed to pass. Kemi Badenoch inevitably has made it clear that her party, Michael Gove's old party, is now against these reforms. What do we want? More rights for landlords. When do we want them? Yesterday and forever. So I haven't rented for years. I had a weird little hiatus when I was a buy-to-let, well, not a buy-to-let landlord, when I was a landlord, because I hadn't sold my old place when I wanted to buy my new place, and the financial situation pre-global financial crisis was such that I could actually keep one on, as it were, but we certainly don't have it anymore. I was a brilliant landlord. I'd put it all in the hands of a social housing organisation, so didn't make as much money as we could have done, but was comfortable that the tenants were being properly looked after. So I don't know what it's like to be a renter in 2025. But I do know that if those are the three areas that the Renters' Rights Bill addresses, no-fault evictions, giving the flat to the highest bidder, squeezing people out, in other words, and not doing essential repairs within fixed time periods, then the world's tiniest violin will not be tiny enough to play a little dirge in defence of landlords. So, how bad is it? 0345 6060 973. Talk to me about those three things. The essential repairs that your landlord has not undertaken. And then tell me how you feel about the fact that the Tories are resisting plans to force them to do so. 0345 6060 973. I can't imagine what a no-fault eviction is like, especially if you've had a few. As people look at the financial situation, and probably Liz Truss plays a part in this, and decide they don't want to keep their property, their investment property, anymore. And bad news for you. You're homeless. You've got to find somewhere new to live. 0345 6060 973. Tell me that I've got it the wrong way around, that landlords need way more protection. Their assets need way more protection than those peasants' actual homes. 0345 6060 973. And I guess less likely, tell me what it's like to find a flat you love and then just about scrape the cash together to pay the rent and find out that someone's waltzed in and offered the landlord even more than they were asking for in the first place. How demoralising that can be. But the first two, I think, are the big ones. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. Who has the whip hand in the relationship between landlords and tenants? And how do you respond to these specific proposals in the Renters' Rights Bill? And I've probably not made you feel very welcome if you are a landlord and you hate the idea of no-fault evictions being outlawed, or you hate the idea of being forced to make essential repairs to the property that people are paying you to live in. But if you think it's more nuanced than I have allowed, you know what to do. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And if you've been a renter for years, is it better, worse, or about the same than what it was, say, 20 years ago, or 30, or if you're old enough, even 40?
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 12. I think we've done it, have we? Have we mentioned it today yet? We haven't, have we? Do you keep an ear out for it? Brexit. Oh, there it is. You'll never guess what's happened. Leo Varadkar, you remember him, former Irish Prime Minister, has called for Theresa May's backstop Brexit deal to be revived to mitigate the impact of Trump's tariffs. That would be the backstop deal that Boris Johnson refused to support in order to replace Theresa May as Prime Minister, and then signed up to a deal that was in many ways inferior to the original. So, good Lord. It's like that line in, is it Simon and Garfunkel? Hello, darkness, my old friend. Come back, hello, backstop, my old friend. Possibly more on that. We've got a lot to get through, though, specifically in the arena of renting. The plural of pendulum, if you care, is almost always pendulums. I looked it up. It's not mystery hour. I'm allowed to. You might occasionally encounter pendular in some sort of physics-type contexts, of course, when you're talking about a coupled pendula, for example. But the general, the common and generally accepted form of plural for pendulum is pendulums. So it is pendulums that we will go with henceforth. And top of the class today, it took me a minute to get this from Ovella. A pendulum that only swings to one side is a battering ram. So when I said, has the pendulum in this area ever actually swung to the renter's side, so the renter ends up with an advantage over the landlord? And I said, I don't think it ever has. So if it's always been on the side, I'm enacting this using the power of mime, although I am also talking. But if it's always been on the landlord's side, then yeah, it's a battering ram, and it's the tenant that's been hit over the years as the pendulum. So just varying degrees of advantage given to the landlord, and then back. I could be wrong. You'll tell me if I am. Lindsay is in Leeds. Lindsay, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome, Lindsay. Welcome.
Long-time listener.
Good.
So I think we're in quite a unique situation, really, because
I might just have to pass you back to Eleanor to see if we can improve your phone line. I don't know whether you fell down a well or pulled on a balaclava, but obviously it was much less clear than it would have been when you spoke to her. But we'll get you back imminently after talking to Vanessa, who's in Raynham. Vanessa, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, my God, James, I'm so nervous. I can't believe I've got through.
It's only me.
I know.
This is going to be a massive anticlimax now, Vanessa. Seriously, lower your expectations immediately.
Oh, my God. Right, I have been through the whole no-fault eviction process, and I had to pull over and ring in.
Go on.
I lived in my house for 12 years with my children, and when we got there, the house was in a terrible state of repairs.
Right.
So I decorated the whole, because I'm a qualified decorator.
Okay.
I decorated the whole place, tiled the bathroom and the kitchen, put all new flooring down. The boiler broke down quite a few times. The pipes under the floor at one point broke, so that we had like a water feature in the back room where the piano was.
Yikes.
So many things. We had a gas safety inspection. My kitchen was condemned because it was unsafe. A new estate agent came in and took over. They came and looked at the property and just said, nope, we can't have this on our books. So I said, well, that's fine, but then you'll need to move us somewhere.
Yeah.
They couldn't do that. I had to look for somewhere myself. But the problem is, I am on my own. I'm a single parent. I do work full-time and I am self-employed, but there was no properties at all for us. Every time we went to look for somewhere, there would be like 30 other people looking with us, so I just didn't stand a chance.
And that's where the bidding wars come in, presumably.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much of this would help you. I mean, when you were in there, Awab's law would have forced your landlord to do essential repairs within fixed time periods. At least that's the plan. So that would have helped you.
No.
Why not?
Because what happened was the new estate agent that came in, he came in, served me with a Section 21 straight away.
Yeah.
And whilst that was happening, they gave me a new cooker. They put new carpet on the stairs. And just fixed the broken plugs, and just barely got it through, so that it wasn't illegal what they were doing.
So they could rent it out to someone else. Why did they want you out?
No, hold on.
Oh,
no,
sorry.
That's not. No, I haven't even got to the punchline yet. You got to hold on.
I am.
In the end, we went to court, lost, and we got evicted. I had to rely on the council, so the bailiffs come and kicked us out.
Oh, Lord.
We couldn't get all of our stuff at one time, and the bailiff said, you could come back and pick up the rest of your stuff. You've got 10 days. So I thought, well, that's fine. I do have my own van, so I can come back over the 10 days and get my stuff. But that's not what he meant. What he meant was I've got 6 hours in the next one of them 10 days to get all of our stuff.
Oh, I see.
So that's what we did. I couldn't get all of my stuff because it was too much.
Sure.
12 years of stuff.
Yeah.
But we were getting evicted because my landlord wanted to sell.
Yeah.
Because his mortgage...
No, well, when I said things would be better for you, I meant if the new laws are brought in.
No, because
he wouldn't have been able to give you a Section 21.
I'll just explain something.
All right.
The reason why, what the point that everyone's missing, and I'm now in a hostel with my kids, right?
Yeah.
Everybody in there has lost their home to that, Airbnb.
Yeah.
My house is now on Airbnb with all my furniture on it, and it's being rented on Airbnb, and that's what landlords are doing.
That's got to hurt.
Yeah, it did at first, but now, we've just had our second Christmas in a hostel. Our second Christmas.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And it's not that there isn't any properties to rent. My house that I was living in was £1,300 a month. Round the corner, the exact same house that was up for rent was £2,000. I cannot do that.
No.
And that is the reality of what is happening. But there's so many people.
And there's no council stock. What are you going to do?
No. Well, we've just got to wait it out. We've just got to wait it out. And my situation sounds terrible, but I'm in a hostel, and all of us have got the same story.
Yeah.
But we're all living in one room. There's girls in there with like 3-4 kids, all under like 10, one room.
Full-time work. Full-time work, you are.
Yeah. And this is the reality.
Model tenant over those 12 years, always paid your rent on time.
Of course, that's why I was there for 12 years.
And this is why I talk about the social contract being broken, because you've done nothing wrong, but you've been punished.
And that is what it is.
So the only bit that I'm going to argue with you about is if the new laws come in, they wouldn't have been able to hit you with the no-fault eviction in quite such a brutal way. I mean, it wouldn't have been indefinite, and the
no-fault eviction would have just stopped everything.
And they'd have had to fix some of the things that you had to fix yourself sooner if the law comes in and if it works. But it would have helped you, the Section 21 ban, but not maybe enough for you to, avoid at some point where you've ended up. And now you're just, like you say, now you're just waiting it out, doing the right thing, keeping your end of the bargain and being let down, which is why I talk about social capital. I feel bad now that you were so excited to come on the radio to talk about something so awful. Can I do anything to help?
Can I just say one more other thing? My daughter goes to Global Academy, and I can't wait for her to come home tonight and tell her that I've run you.
Wow, that is magnificent news. And make sure when she comes to visit that you say Vanessa my mum is Vanessa.
Yeah, listen.
And come and get some VIP treatment. Come and get some VIP treatment in James's studio. All right.
Oh my God, she will.
I mean it. Make
God,
it happen.
I will. Thank you so
I don't know
much.
what the VIP treatment is, but I'll think of something. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. Please don't reveal my name. Well done for putting it at the beginning. 2 things you need to put at the top of the message. If you're criticising me or making a complaint, you have to write, "I love you, James, but," and then it may get read out. And if you want me to keep your name secret, especially if it's WhatsApp, where I can see your full name at the bottom of the message, put it at the top so that I don't say your name and then read it and then get to the end and see that you've asked me not to read it. So well done, you. I've rented the same property for nearly 11 years. I was an exemplary tenant, never late with rent. In that time, my landlord basically ignored me. I never had a signed agreement, but I did have, and still do have, a hole the size of an A4 sheet of paper in my kitchen ceiling, windows that are falling out of their frames, carpets so thin you can see light through from the shop downstairs, through the spaces between the floorboards. I've replaced white goods, decorated, fixed the plumbing and electrics at my own expense, and always kept the place spotless. I'm in a good area. It's a supposedly posh flat, and all was good, despite the aforementioned lack of involvement from the landlord in maintenance. And then I had a mental health crisis. I couldn't work. I got behind on my rent. Let me just click this so that I can read it properly. I didn't realise it was quite that long. Forgive me. Nearly there. And this is another point as well, isn't it? Is that tenants have very little protection. I kept him involved. I gave him a plan for repaying. He insisted on a Section 8 and a Section 21 eviction order last Christmas. It was only because he messed up the process and his solicitor was useless, thank goodness, that I'm still in the place. And my payment suggestion was accepted by the court. I wanted to die, James, and I thought about it daily. I consider myself lucky that greed blinded him to due process, but it made me so very ill. I'm still saddled with over £2,000 of his legal fees on top of the arrears. Where on God's green earth is the justice in that? And I guess that the ban on Section 21 eviction orders would have protected you from some elements of that unpleasantness, and also the Awab's law, where he would have been required to pay for the improvements that you required. And remember, we're discussing putative legislation, so the question of who's going to enforce it and who's going to do it, for the time being at least, is moot. Lindsay, oh good, we got Lindsay's line back in Leeds. 3 L's. Lindsay, Leeds on the line. Lindsay, what would you like to say?
Hello. So I think we've been in a pretty unique situation, really, because I own my own property, but we had to move out for 15 months while our house was fixed after subsidence. So we were thrown into the world of renting, oh my goodness, it was just awful.
What were you most surprised by? How long was it since you'd been in the world of renting?
Oh, since I was a student.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I don't know how long ago that was, do I?
Actually, no, probably because over 20 years ago.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you.
Over 20 years ago. But
so what happened? What shocked you most?
Well, my husband's disabled, and I work. We've got 2 dogs. Finding accommodation with 2 dogs is remarkably difficult in the first place.
Of course it is. Yeah.
But it was.
You often have to pay extra as well. Yes, some landlords let you have a dog, but only if you pay extra to. I think there's a story about an MP being in that situation in one of the newspapers this morning. But it is, yeah. And of course, your dogs are a huge part of your life, and you know.
Well, I mean, we couldn't put them in kennels. They're two Alaskan Malamutes, so they're big dogs.
Quite large.
But we were there for the first place. We were there for 6 months, and straight after Christmas, we got a Section 21 without any notice. So
had you done anything wrong? Had you been model tenants up to this point?
Yeah, well, absolutely. But they decided they were going to sell up. So what could we do? So my husband spent 2 days cleaning the property while we moved into a new place, which took us ages to find anyway. But, you know, we were worried that we were going to end up in
well, who knows where?
Caravan, who knows?
Well, and I imagine if you moved out because of subsidence, the insurance company were paying your rent, were they? They
were paying the rent, but we had to pay the deposit.
So you had to find a deposit. They pay the rent, and then the landlord just decides after 6 months that's it. A change of plan. It might be your home, but it's my asset. And at the moment, the law prioritises the value, the importance of the asset over the importance of the home.
Yes, absolutely.
That's wrong, right? That feels wrong on every level.
Yes,
that feels like classic conservatism. It's here you go, here's someone rich, we'll look after them and stuff everybody else.
Well, absolutely. But I mean, to add insult to injury, on top of the fact that they'd thrown us out, they then wanted... My husband spent 2 days cleaning that property to get... I mean, he left it cleaner than when we moved in.
Yes.
Because when we moved in, there was food in the fridge, there was stuff on top of the fridge, there was bags of rubbish. And my husband left it absolutely pristine. And they wanted to charge us £300 for cleaning and for a light bulb.
They always do that. They just try their luck. And some people, to avoid a row... So you refused to pay, I hope?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
And they shut up in a heartbeat, did they?
Yeah. We came to an arrangement.
Okay.
Put it that
but
way.
they always try that with God. It's a long time, the same as you. It's a long time since I rented, but the deposit was always. So landlords have been having a laugh for years, and I feel mildly sorry for landlords that haven't. There are good landlords. But you only need to change the law when the bad landlords massively outnumber the good landlords. And the good landlords won't really be affected by this because they wouldn't have been taking advantage of the situation in the first place. Otherwise, they would cease to be good landlords and would immediately become bad landlords. Are you still with me at the back? Exactly. So, what's not to like? Answer. Well, I look upon people like Lindsay as taps, money taps that I should be able to turn on and off at will, regardless of the disruption to their lives that no-fault evictions represent. 0345 60 60973. I thought Grant as well talked about Jeremy Hunt, remember him? Changing the rules in his final budget so that Airbnbs would be treated the same way for tax reasons on interest repayments. I think you're right. I don't know what difference that makes in this situation. I don't know quite the point that you're making, Grant. I don't know whether your predictive text went a bit weird halfway through. House rentals, if you have a mortgage, is a hand grenade that is waiting to go off, he concludes. Because of the Jeremy Hunt bit? I don't know. Will's in Swadlincote. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, you did, James, yeah.
No, I obviously didn't.
I thought, well, Swadlincote. I don't know, really. I'm not from here. So.
Oh, all right. Carry on,
Everyone
Will.
just calls it Swad.
Do they?
Yeah, just Swad.
Oh, you live and learn. All right, Will's in Swad. Will, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah. Basically, I mean, I feel a little bit bad because some of the horrendous situations your previous callers have been in.
Yeah.
We've been given a Section 21 last week, and we've been told by our letting agent that the reason that we've been given it is because of the new legislation coming in, which will make it more difficult, which I feel is going to create a little bit of a vacuum of.
Well, so they know that they're going to want you out at some point in the not too distant future, and it's going to be a heck of a lot harder after the legislation comes in. So they're slinging you out now.
I believe so. Yeah. I think
that makes sense, doesn't it?
Basically, what has happened is when we moved in, we were told it was a long-term rental and it wasn't going to be up for sale.
Okay.
And we had the evaluation done on it. Well, the landlords had a valuation done on it, told to us under the pretense of remortgaging,
right.
and
they
obviously
were really sizing it up for the estate agent.
Yeah. So basically, we've been told that we've now got until the 3rd of June to find somewhere new. The problem being is that if you look at the rentals within a radius, I've got 3 kids that go to school locally.
Right.
Each at important times of their education. My oldest daughter's doing the GCSEs.
Right.
That in the area, there's about 40 properties that are available that might not be suitable. For sale, there's about 400, which is an option for it.
Right. I mean, so there could be a bit of an unforeseen problem on the horizon here.
I believe so. Yeah. This is the thing that I think that it's created, that the government have brought this in. It's going to create a problem. Because landlords are going to say, well, do you know what? I don't want to go through the court process. So, I completely understand. Somebody needs to sell their house. They need to sell their house. It's obviously the part of renting that is the downside.
Well, I mean, this is where ideology kicks in a little bit, as opposed to practicality. I think the law should protect the person whose home it is more than it protects the person whose asset it is. But getting to the place where that's true is going to involve the problems that you've just brought to our attention, because it won't just be your landlord who thinks, oh, well, stuff that for a game of soldiers, I'll get rid of it now. Yeah, exactly. And to be honest with you, I mean, we've, in terms of what's available around the place, it's going to create such a massive hike in rent. We're looking at maybe £600 more a month. Jeez. Which is obviously difficult to find. You add council tax on top of that, and it's worse. So even if it does end up in a better place than we're in currently, getting there is it's going to be people like you that pay with pain and with money. Yeah, I mean we've looked after it. We have. I know you've asked a question to everybody. We have been model tenants. We've paid. Yeah. On time every time. We've looked after the house. When we have the letting agent round to do their inspection, which again is a little bit intrusive, to be honest. Yeah, of course it is. A little bit patronising, Yes. It's your home. Again, it's the difference between home and asset, isn't it? Yeah, and we get complimented. Oh, your house is so beautiful. You keep the house. What do you think we are? I know. Animals. Yeah. Funny. But they may have had bad experiences in the past, but it can lack dignity sometimes, that relationship, I think. Yeah. And I think that's the problem at the minute with me. It feels all a little bit undignified, and it feels like as a father, it's a little bit, it's hard to explain to the kids, especially my youngest one. She doesn't really understand that it's our home. She doesn't understand why it's not our home, if that makes sense. Of course it makes sense. I mean, you've done nothing wrong. That's the thing that comes up in the course of these conversations, is you've done nothing wrong, but it feels like you have. And like the earlier caller, like Vanessa, who's actually been punished, despite not having done anything wrong. And you are, in a way, as well. Yeah. Oh, I hate it. I really hate it. And I also hate the fact that even if we end up in a better place, it's not going to be much use to you and your family in the short term. I really do. Where did you grow up?
In Samworth, which is just outside of Birmingham.
No, I know. I was just trying to place the accent. I was just turning into a bit. It's not a horrible accent, but my parents spent thousands and thousands of pounds ensuring that I don't have it, Will.
Yeah.
so there it is, 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. I don't know whether it will play out this way in France, but remember that when an immigrant is convicted of a crime, it proves that there's something wrong with immigrants. But when Marine Le Pen is convicted of a crime, it proves that there's something wrong with courts. That's usually how these things work. Sophie Pedder is the Economist's Paris bureau chief and so well placed to tell us about the significance of this verdict and potential 4-year prison sentence after the leader of what was once the Front National was convicted of embezzlement. First question, Sophie, thank you for your time. Is she likely to go to prison?
She's probably going to be given an electronic tag. That would be my guess. That tends to happen when it involves sort of senior figures like her. Nicolas Sarkozy currently wears one, for example. He's the former president of France. So there is precedent for that. I don't think you'll see her behind bars. I'd be extremely surprised if that were to happen. I would just say, though, James, you need to remember that the word embezzlement is being used here. The court made it very clear that she was not accused or convicted of personal enrichment. That's the phrase they use. So it was the misuse of parliamentary funds. That is true, but it wasn't personal enrichment.
She was using money intended for one purpose for another purpose.
Exactly. It was European Parliament funds. They had these assistants who were supposed to be doing a job in Brussels or in Strasbourg. Some of them were barely seen in either of those cities, and they were using the money to for their national politics, party politics. That was the complaint.
No prizes for guessing which British politician had his salary docked a few years ago for paying an assistant who was supposed to have been working on EU matters but probably wasn't. But that just highlights the difference between French law perhaps and English law. What's the broader political significance of this then? Because she was, I think, leading the polls, early though they may be, for the 2027 presidential elections.
You're right. I mean, the earliest polls showed her in the lead, a big lead for the first round voting. It's a 2-vote system in France. It's hard to overstate what the significance is. It's an political earthquake for France. She's been so much the figure that has sort of brought the FN, now called the RN, from the fringes into what's considered sort of reasonably respectable politics, to the degree that she sits in Parliament. Her party, if you just take single parties by itself, is the biggest party in Parliament. Doesn't form the biggest bloc, but it is the biggest single party. So, she sits on the benches in Parliament. She participates in committees. She's had vice presidencies of Parliament. It's for her to be banned from running for the presidency is quite something, particularly when things were looking favourable for her. And Emmanuel Macron, as you know, can't run again. He can't run for a third consecutive term. So the way to the presidency looked clearer for her than it has done in either her two previous presidential bids. And
I mean, the obvious replacement is, forgive me, I've temporarily forgotten his name, the younger chap.
Jordan Bardella.
Who leads the party. Will he just slide over into the presidential nomination now?
Well, I think that the party hasn't really been ready for this. I don't think they were expecting, and a lot of us weren't expecting, to be honest, the harshness of the sentencing. That she was found guilty wasn't hugely surprising, but the sentence, it being applied immediately with a 5-year ban, that is what was requested by the prosecutors, but is quite an unusual sentence. Jordan Bardella, he's 29 years old. He is a smooth operator. He is very popular, but he's young. He'd been readying himself, I think, for the job as Prime Minister under the scenario that she wins the presidency. But it's quite something to think about running for the presidency itself, not just at that age, but also without very much experience behind him. So the trouble for the party is they hadn't prepared. They don't really have alternatives. It's not as if there's another sort of senior figure sitting around waiting. And just for that reason, the party really is in some disarray, even if he is the sort of natural alternative.
Very young, actually. No, when you put it in those terms. Le Pen herself, 56, and he's barely half her age. Final question: Is the role of Le Pen, and of course before her father, distinct from the party in the way that he was? So although her polling was high, it wasn't necessarily polling for the party, for National Rally. It was polling for Marine Le Pen.
You're right up to a point. I mean, she has been very popular. She's so well known. I mean, she can't walk down the street in France, possibly elsewhere either. There is a huge popularity attached to her. But Jordan Bardella is also personally very popular. Yes. There was a poll that came out before this court decision, which put him in third place nationally, and her in first. So he's not unknown, and I think that she's done so much of that work that we were talking about earlier in terms of making the party less of a kind of fringe extremist movement, that he would be able to inherit that. I think the problem is more a question of his own credibility, his experience, the sense that he would be very young to do this. He would be the sort of candidate you could imagine in 5-10 years' time looking credible. But goodness, at the age of 29,
well, yeah, no,
that's
absolutely.
Quite some burden for him to carry.
It's not just policemen getting younger. We shall watch this space, Sophie. Before you go, you may appreciate this with your early correction at the beginning of this. Apparently it's only embezzlement if it comes from the embezzle region of France. Otherwise it's just sparkling corruption. That's from Becky. It's 12:55. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thank you, Sophie Pedder, the Economist's bureau chief in Paris. Couple more calls on the question of landlords and indeed renters. Hillary's on the Wirral. Hillary, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I'm a landlord.
Landlady.
And
Landperson.
Landlady, I guess. Although I always think that feels a bit... I'm a publican.
Of course you are. My grandma was a landlady, but in a pub in Leeds. So there it is.
Exactly. So I feel a bit odd saying it that way.
Yes,
but
fair enough.
I feel that... So I'm a landlord. I have 8 properties on the Wirral here.
Right.
Most of those properties are in what one might call challenging areas. And so these are not properties that are going to be tenanted by people who are working. Quite a few of my properties are tenanted by people who are in receipt of universal credit, typically. But I feel that landlords, and I think it's a really difficult one.
Yeah.
I am pro the cessation of no-fault evictions. I'm absolutely pro that. I don't think I would never do that. Morally, I would see that as egregious. I would never do that. However, I do think it's important to state a little bit about being a landlord is hard.
Yeah.
And being a good landlord, more importantly, let me phrase that properly, is hard. And when it's done well, it's work, and it should be work. And, my tenants, I wouldn't dream of leaving any of my tenants in mouldy conditions. But equally, I have suffered financial loss as a result of my tenants. And I just wanted to point out the other side of the argument, if that's okay.
Of course it is. It's important, Hillary.
My tenant, who very sadly became an alcoholic, who'd been in my property for 7 years, stopped paying his rent. And within my legal rights as a landlord, initially I didn't use any legal due process. I went and saw him. I said, John, you're really in arrears here. We're getting a bit sticky. Can we put together a payment plan, just you and I, whereby you can pay something? And initially that worked, but then after a while, all I got was abuse.
Right.
And in the end, he barricaded himself in my property. Because of the courts being backed up for so long post-COVID, it took me 14 months to evict him.
Wow.
He left my property in a disgusting, I think, highly, in a really...
Maliciously
really
gross.
state.
Maliciously disgusting.
Maliciously gross. I mean, we're talking feces and all sorts.
I thought we might be, but thanks for clarifying.
We are $5,000 in the hole as a result of no rent, what he effectively owes.
Yes.
And because I value my morality so much, I kept his possessions, not for the 1 month that is statutory after we evicted him. I kept his possessions for 8 months post his eviction, so that when he was rehoused, which he now has been, he could come back to the property and collect all his Beatles memorabilia, etc. And I'm still in the hole,
And I've got nothing. I've got nothing but sympathy for you. And oddly, I wonder whether really good landlords need a little bit more protection from really bad tenants.
I guess the only we literally couldn't.
No, but I don't know whether it's not a silver lining. I don't know what the phrase is that I'm looking for. But when the court system is up and running, you shouldn't find yourself in such dire circumstances, should you? When the legal process is operating at the pace it's supposed to operate at, then it should have moved to help you quicker.
One would hope that would be the case. However, recovering the debt, even if I had gone through a court process in a more efficient way, even the debt that he owes, I have no hope of ever recovering that because I can't get blood out of a stone.
And there'll be people messaging me, Alan has already, no one forced you to invest your money in property. There is an odd attitude to landlords. I probably suffer from it a bit myself, which is why I'm so grateful for your call, because any other business, if you were ripped off by a customer to the tune of £5,000, there'd be no question of whether or not you deserved our sympathy. And there's no question in my mind of whether or not you do, Hilary. You obviously do. And in some ways, you've paid a price for your decency. And I'm glad that we found time to get you on at the end of the programme, because otherwise it would have been a very tenant-heavy conversation, and we need reminders that there can be situations in which landlord good, tenant bad. To pretend that it's always tenant good, landlord bad is reductivist and unhelpful. So thank you on every front. But with every caller that I've spoken to this hour, it's you relay unhappy circumstances about which we can do nothing. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bit of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.